Good afternoon and welcome to the March 8th Council work session. And we have two items. I'm going to assume that we're going to roughly spend half of the work session on each of the items, and we'll see how that goes. So, Manager, do you want to introduce the first item?
Yes, Mayor, I will. Maybe what I can do is I'll just give a little bit of a context which will apply to both of them, and then maybe I'll just talk real briefly about both of them, so then when you have your conversation. So just to remind everybody, today we're talking about two specific actions that are before you, one around dogs and the other around smoking. But these are really in the context of a much broader conversation that has been going on for the last many years around downtown, and most recently around some of the public safety items in the downtown. But it has been in this context of not only public safety, but there's been a lot of talk about placemaking. That was part of the Project for Public Spaces, and really thinking about how to revitalize and re-energize downtown. This council approved the expansion of the urban renewal district, or the extension of the urban renewal district, which really was about plazas and civic places. And so there's been a lot of work about how do we re-energize downtown through those public spaces. Of course, you know that world-class high-speed fiber is coming into town, which will have a great impact on the economic prosperity of downtown. So that's continuing to move forward. So there has been a lot of work done on a variety of things, to include public safety. And so many of you will remember last fall, before your winter break, we had brought a number of items that related to public safety and public health to the council. And we talked about moving forward on several of those. You gave your okay on those. There were some specific items in which you actually voted on and wanted to come back. Two of which you're talking about today. One is a public safety item around dogs, and the other is a public health item around smoking. And so when it to kind of distinguish between those two, because I know there have been some conversations about particularly smoking as a public health or public safety issue. And for us, it's a public health issue. Sometimes we've perhaps inadvertently referenced it more in the public safety realm, but it really isn't. It's a public health issue. And so the two of these are just coming to you at the same time by virtue of wanting to try to put something in place, if you choose to, as we move into the summer. And that's the timing of both of these. There's our initial recommendations have changed just a little bit. So, for example, on the smoking, we did hear the public input side, and where the original ordinance that you went before the public hearing earlier talked about if somebody wanted to opt out of the smoking ordinance for their particular property after 6 o'clock, they could apply to do that. Based on public input, what we have essentially said and provided as an alternative that a business can opt out just 24/7, and so that is now an option for your consideration, and it's if you choose to move forward on that. And then with the dog ordinance, one of the things that we have said, because it really directly relates to public safety, and as the police chief has talked about in the downtown, one of the nice things is there's a lot of increased number of pedestrians, but there's also numbers of dogs that are in the downtown. Those two uses aren't always compatible, and so one way to make that a safer place is to reduce the total number of dogs, and that those dogs that are in the downtown are vaccinated and licensed. And so that's also a piece of what you'll see in the ordinance. And so with that, we'll be here for questions as we go.
Okay, so, and there are two ordinances, so, I'm not going to orchestrate that. I mean, there are two versions. There's an option A and an option B, and we're talking about the dogs first. So just so you're clear, and so we'll be clear what we're doing. So do we not want a motion?
Maybe I can just ask one more piece of it, just as a reminder. Both of these are just pilot programs. Really, both of them would extend until November 1st. They would sunset on November 1st. the council would have to take action to extend them beyond November 1st, and we would use that time in the interim to learn and to adapt and find out what works, and then provide that recap back to the council as we move into the fall.
So it's really up to you. If you want to just have some general discussion before a motion's put on the table, then you can talk about all the different options, and then when the motion gets put on the table, the motion will want to specify option A or option B.
Right. I think that's the way to go. Let's have a general conversation first. And Betty, you're up first.
Thank you. Before Mike, before that,
Mayor, could I get in the queue?
Yes, you can.
See how fast this goes.
we're just talking about the dogs right now, right?
Right.
Not smoking. Okay. First, I think this is really about people. It's about the kinds of people that some people don't want downtown. And I think we should admit that that's what we're talking about. We could make an ordinance that says you have to be well-dressed or have a good job to go be downtown, and maybe that would serve the purpose. I think that dogs are not the problem. It is many people, and if you've read all your email, you've heard from people who like to walk their dogs through downtown, very respectable people with jobs. I have seen people, the last time someone brought this up, a man spoke to me at the farmer's market. He said, my dog is my only friend, and I don't live downtown, but I live nearby, and I walk through here on the way to the river all the time. And I think there are a lot of other people like that. I've seen spouses of elected officials, I won't say who, walking their dogs through the middle of downtown. And perfectly well behaved. We have, as someone pointed out to us, we have 62 laws. I didn't check that out, but I assume it's true, about dogs already. Maybe we could enforce the ones we have. I agree they should have their shots. They should have to be licensed. And if they're downtown, they should be leashed, even though I don't mind dogs that loose either. And this is not personal to me, except I think it's really important. I'm not bringing my dog downtown. I won't say her name right now. This gets awkward. Well, I will say my dog has the same name as our mayor, but so it gets a little awkward talking about her. I thought we've gotten a lot of good. Dogs are really important to people. There are ways we could get. If they're bad, if they're vicious, there are other ways to get rid of them. And there are other ways, I don't think we've looked enough for ways to keep people from spreading out their belongings on the sidewalk. I agree that's unsightly, but I'm sure there are other possibilities. I want to read a couple of things from Jack Dresser's letter before I run out of time. He points out that neither dogs nor smoking were mentioned by the consultants that we just had, who were telling us how to make downtown better. If that had appeared to be a big problem to them, I assume they would have suggested doing something about that. And we want people to be sociable and enjoy being downtown. And he points out another thing, which is really true. Dogs are a natural conduit of conversation between strangers, an emotional common denominator between people of all backgrounds and socioeconomic levels. I think that's very true. And that, personally, most of my friends I met through dogs, and they're good people. That's all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mike?
Thank you, Mayor. It doesn't happen very often in the 10 plus years I've had the privilege to sit here that I come to the table finally for a decision day on an issue, and I'm completely in the dead center middle of the road, and at this moment I don't know how I'm going to vote on this. I really don't. I'm right. The discussion will be persuasive to me, I think. Some of the factors that are affecting my consideration here, Justice Lewis Brandeis, I agree with Betty that this is an issue about people. That, what Brandeis said, that my right to swing my arms about wildly ends at the tip of your nose, right? So the right of people to bring their dogs downtown and to be with them in that way, that's important. But that imposes on other people's rights to be able to walk the streets free of that, and free of the fear that they sometimes feel from those animals. And I think the manager has a point, and the police chief have a point when they talk about the issues of the environment being too close with so many people to be an appropriate place for dogs. That makes a lot of sense. And I'm also persuaded by a lot of the downtown business owners that say, frankly, do something. We know this is small. This is not a solution. This is something that may help, though. I'm persuaded by that. I'm also certainly still in the same place that if we want to truly address the issues, the big issues that we have downtown effectively, as I think our community expects us to, I believe we should talk more about the bigger weaknesses in our ability to have the downtown that we want. And for me, that's around doing enforcement well from the council tables, support of the great job that our officers do. So that's where I would want to put all my efforts, and this, as I have said before, seems like we're nibbling around the edges. But I'm open to try something in this particular case, knowing that it sunsets in November, knowing what this summer is going to be like. The pragmatist in me says, let's try this summer and see what happens. Thank you.
Thank you. Claire?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So I'm one of those elected officials whose spouse likes to walk their dog downtown. So, you know, I recognize that this would have a personal, if we pass this ban, you know, it would have a personal impact. But, you know, I feel like this is a pilot project. It would sunset in November unless we decided it was really tackling the problem effectively. And I really think, as I've thought about this and taken in public comment, you know, we are trying to address a very acute problem that seems to be happening in a very small part of our downtown. So this isn't about trying to solve all the social justice issues that we might have with our downtown or create the perfect downtown. It's about addressing a very specific problem that we are experiencing right now. And I actually think it's not about who those dog owners are. We wouldn't be okay with this situation if a local kennel club decided that they were going to bring their dogs down to that corner every Wednesday for 6 hours and have the kind of conflicts that we're seeing now with other folks who want to use those public spaces or travel through those public spaces without being impacted, worried about a potentially aggressive group of dogs. No one's being asked to give up their dog. We would just be asking that they don't bring it to this particular area. And in talking to the chief of police about enforcement, you know, he felt like this was a very obvious thing that can be enforced pretty effectively by downtown officers in a way that other things we have prohibition against, like littering, cannot, because the officer actually has to see the littering happening in order to do any kind of enforcement. But I also would imagine that someone just traveling through the area with their dog and from one place to another probably wouldn't be tracked down by a police officer and asked if they live in the area. That really would be if they decided to stay in one place within the map. One concern I have, and I'm sorry I can't see the clock, so I don't know what my time is, but
45 seconds.
Okay, so my understanding is right now the way the map is drawn for both of these proposals is it includes the Lane County dining room, which is, in my understanding, one of the few social services that actually exists in the map that we're looking at. I would propose that we exclude the Lane County dining room from the dog ordinance. So I believe that's on 8th and Lincoln, right on that top corner of the map. So at this point, I'm willing to support this as a pilot project if we can amend the map to take the dining room out of it.
Thank you.
Yes, and we heard that that was going to be a topic discussed today, so I have prepared a motion that would carve out the public right-of-way that abuts that the dining room and that address, and I actually provided that to Councilor Semple, so we're prepared to do that.
Okay, great. So we can move on that, but let's keep talking. So, Chris.
Thank you. I agree with the other folks who have said this is not the solution to the problems downtown. In fact, it's not, you know, the big magic bullet or even a very focused solution. I have really struggled with this as Mike has, but I've struggled with it because I want to approach this as a public safety issue, not a people issue. And so I just want to make it clear that I'm not looking for a way to use dogs to get rid of people that I don't like downtown. That's not my goal here. But I have walked downtown. I've heard about people and other animals being attacked by dogs downtown. I'm concerned about the problem in downtown. The proposed solution is one that we have tried before and has worked very well before. This is not a new idea. This is taking an idea that we've successfully applied in other parts of town, and we want to try it here to see if it can also work here. And so, as the others have said, I am willing to look at this and be supportive of it because it is a pilot. Just as the conversation on South Willamette Street was, well, let's not agree to do it or agree not to do it as a permanent solution. Let's try it. And I think trying something to see if it's a good idea is not a bad idea. So I'm willing to support it as a pilot. And I do agree, absolutely, we should carve out the dining room space because of its unique nature. I don't think it really creates a significant impediment to the rest of the implementation of this, and that's a special area that probably should be accommodated. So I'm willing to support it, not because it's the solution for downtown, but because I do think it has some public safety benefits that we've already seen in the West University neighborhood that perhaps could work here, but let's test it to see if that's indeed the case.
George?
Thank you. On first read of this, saying, this is kind of a bad idea. It's not, unfortunately, the dogs are getting blamed, and it's not really the dog's fault because most dogs are pretty nice creatures. It's the behavior that they have either learned or allowed to exhibit by their owners. I am a very strong believer. I'm a dog lover. I had at one time 3 and was fostering a 4th one for the rescue group that I work for. I used to bring my dogs downtown. I don't do that anymore. I'm down to 1 dog now. I've seen what happens when you get this large concentration of these unruly dogs, and it happens on a regular basis down here, and you get people coming to and from on the sidewalks. And, when you're sitting in your car a block away, you can hear 3 or 4 dogs going at each other. It would kind of intimidate anybody to get out and walk across a sidewalk where these animals are. This is a pilot project. At this point, I'm willing to support it. It's not a cure-all. It's not a fix to our problems we're having downtown. It's a kind of a one-step and a multi-step solution process to improving our downtown. And, it's something that the chief has asked for, and I look at it as a tool. And this is my 15th year on the council. I don't think I've ever said no to a request by the police department for an added tool to help them do a better job and make their job a little bit easier. So at this point, I am willing to support the ordinance, understanding that it is temporary, it is a pilot project, and we'll take another look at it.
Okay. Emily?
I'm against this. I think it's classist and unfair. I understand the problem. I go downtown several times a day. I don't see this group of dogs every single time I go down. Maybe we can have an ordinance that you can't have more than 2 dogs in one place. I wonder what the benchmarks will be to see whether or not it has succeeded. I suppose the officers who are already overworked will be enforcing it. There's a problem with service dogs and people claiming that they have service dogs, and there's no way to prove it. I've heard that if we just tell people they can't have dogs there, they won't, because that's what happened at the university. Maybe that will happen, but it does exclude homeless people because they have nowhere to leave their dog. They can't abandon it. It's companionship, protection, and warmth. I think there's other things we can do. I know people are anxious for something to happen right now. I get it. But I think it's the wrong approach. If you don't want people to be there, give them somewhere else to go. If you don't want them to smoke there, give them somewhere else to go. Yes, they can take their dogs somewhere else, but it's not, it's a meeting zone there. Let's give them somewhere else. If we don't like feces on the sidewalk, let's put in some bathrooms. If we don't like people sleeping on the sidewalk, let's have a place where people can lie down. I suggest the City Hall lot is available. Let's start working seriously for a community center where people can bring their dogs. Let's stop telling people no and find alternatives. Weird things happen with this. The Overpark is in the zone. This building is not. It's okay to have a dog in your car. If I put my dog in my car and park at the Overpark, which I don't have to do, but I want to go walk that dog at lunch, I have to drive my car out of the Overpark. I've seen more dogs walking downtown that are obviously housed. I think it may be a reaction to this. People used to walk away, now they're walking towards. Personally, which it's not about me, but I live 1 block away from one end of the zone, and I work just outside the zone on another block. So I would have to walk to 7th from Broadway. I think it's awkward. I don't think it's fair. I think it's the wrong approach.
Okay, before we go for a second round, Greg, do you want to weigh in on anything? Or Alan, either?
No, not at this time, Mayor.
Okay, Alan? I want to interject a couple of my thoughts in reaction to some of the things that have been said. And the first thing is that I agree about the dining room. I think that's really a hardship that we're imposing on people unintentionally, and we can remove that hardship. I will just say that I'm a dog owner, and I walk my dog. And when I see a dog on the other side of the street, I have a street in between, because my dog, vaccinated, well-behaved, well taken care of, still bristles and snarls at various dogs, and it's unpredictable. And so I just put that out there, that dogs can be unpredictable, and anyone bringing a dog downtown, whoever they are, can have one of these sort of random events where dogs are snarling at each other. So they're just putting that out there. It's not, we can all have this experience, even if we're taking care of our animals. And finally, I do feel like it's a pilot project, and it's worth testing, and it's a small area, so people can walk around it. But I'll be interested to hear the rest of the conversation. So Betty, it's back to you.
Thank you. When Mike said this was a rare time that I thought he was going to say that he agreed with me.
Not today, Betty. Not today.
I was hopeful for a minute, but
Happens sometimes.
I know, but I thought you were going to say you agreed with me
sorry.
today.
Sure.
I'm thinking about people who stay in the Hilton, for example, and that is a dog-friendly hotel. So is the Inn at the Fifth. And if they go out and walk their dogs, and they're going to have to walk their dogs if they're staying there with them, are they going to have to show proof that will the hotel count as a home while they're there? I don't know.
Council, you want to?
Yes, it would be considered a lawful residence at that moment.
Okay. So that eliminates the people who have enough money to stay in the hotel then. And since we work here, I assume we could, I'm not asking to walk my dog except across the street, but since we work here, I assume that we could say we work downtown.
Not in the zone.
You could be, if you were walking, the way it's written is that for somebody that's employed within the zone. So, yes, you're employed.
So,
if the area is downtown. Oh, you're down here. I'm sorry. I apologize. Yeah. So the city hall is outside of the downtown core itself. It's located outside the downtown core.
Oh, so we could get arrested too. Okay.
It's not an arrestable offense.
I wasn't thinking of myself ever really, but I'm thinking of justice and common sense. So the hotels are exempted. And when people say it works in the university neighborhood, I don't know what it means by it works. The dogs aren't there anymore. If that's what you want, and the people who have the dogs and are transients aren't there anymore. And if that's the real purpose, I'm sure it isn't just. As for dogs that fight, if they're rowdy, I think that the police could find something to say about causing a disturbance, disorderly conduct maybe. I don't know if dogs are allowed to do disorderly conduct or not, but I'm sure there are laws that could apply. And if there aren't now, I think with people really using their creativity, could think of some way to make a law that would stop the behavior you want to stop, which is people spreading out their belongings on the sidewalk. And I think there are other ways to do that besides this, and I do think that's what it's about. I think people who come to town just to visit, they get out of their cars and they want to walk around, and it's going to feel very unfriendly if a police officer walks up and says, "Do you live here?" And if not, you can't have your dog here. It's a very unfriendly thing to do, and it's getting at something. It's like, well, as Tom Camus said, and somebody else said in our public hearing, just a knee-jerk reaction. Just say, we have to do something, so we'll do something stupid. And I could see it's going to pass, but I think it's a big mistake. Thank you.
Mike?
I agree with that last statement, Betty. Actually, the last two. If I were walking around on a baseball field or in a park swinging a bat, people would say he's out exercising or he's playing ball, you know. If I were walking around downtown swinging a bat, there would be a different reaction, I think, from folks. Might be afraid they could get hit. They'd probably want to avoid that guy swinging a bat around. Those are examples of the point that was made to me about the wisdom of voting in favor of this, that dogs downtown are inappropriate because of the close proximity to people, just like 13th Street, which I have to say, that registers with me. I understand that. But I have to say making the amendment to preclude the dining room doesn't make sense if that's the argument, because there's a whole bunch of folks all clustered around together there, and if you have several of them with dogs, then it's inherently dangerous. So if this is about public safety and we're going to preclude an area where there's a bunch of people all gathered together and they all have dogs, that doesn't make much sense to me. So for me, if the justification is safety, okay, I can get behind that idea, but there's a couple of problems. The negative side pieces for me now, and I'd love to hear somebody address them. Number one, that there are so many rules we make at this table, and then we ask our police officers, please go out and enforce those rules. We hire them to carry a gun, to be armed, and to force people to behave by the rules we set at the table. This is going to be yet another rule we've made that will be very difficult to enforce. Someone can say that's a service animal. There's any number of things we've talked about that make this difficult to enforce. And so I don't understand the value of it. It seems a little silly to me in some ways as well. The other piece is the concern for the dogs. I can easily see the reality that in the heat of the summer months, in July and August, someone who spends their time with their dog regularly, especially if they drive, has a need to come downtown, now has to leave their dog in the car when it's 100 degrees outside, because it's not legal to have the dog on the street. So the unintended consequence may very well be that we increase the number of dogs left in cars downtown in the heat of the summer. And I would really hope we have some manner of addressing that if we're going to preclude people from bringing their dogs out as they walk around downtown. I don't know what it would be, but I hope we can. Thank you.
Who's next? Alan.
So I have a dog, and I love her very much. I walked her downtown. I think the context of this this ordinance is really important. It's one of many things that we're trying to do downtown to make it a more hospitable place. Extra police, park blocks, reprogramming, public spaces review, community court, a bunch of other things. I really believe that we need to take some action downtown. The circumstances downtown are just no longer tolerable. And we need many tools, not just one. So we need a lot of arrows in our quiver. The problem isn't about the dogs. It's about the behavior of the people who have the dogs. And sometimes it's about the dogs. But that's really about the owners. I walked my dog downtown and felt afraid for my dog. And had to go a different way because of her getting in potentially in a fight, not because she's an aggressive dog, just because she likes other dogs, and that could be a problem. So there actually was a woman downtown who was attacked by a dog, and her dog was killed by an out of control dog, by a bad owner. And people who call this a knee-jerk reaction, I'd ask her if she thinks this is a knee-jerk reaction. And I believe it actually has worked downtown. There is no problem with dogs on campus. There's no problem with dogs on that little stretch of outside of campus, near campus, and much less behavioral problems with the humans. So as far as the enforcement is concerned, I think the chief said that they really don't need to enforce it. They just tell people and it gets handled. I don't think you even had a citation, if only one, in the long time, 20 years that's been in place. So as far as a tool that the cops want to use, they actually asked for this tool. So as one of the things they could do. This is a pilot. It goes till November 1st. If it doesn't work, if it creates problems, let's get rid of it. And we'll take a look at it when we come back from summer break and see that if it's done what we think it's supposed to do, or if it's created more problems. So I'm in favor of let's go ahead and try this on a pilot perspective. And I'm also in favor of carving out the dining hall.
Emily?
Mayor, could I get in the queue again?
Yes, you can. Emily?
Responding to random events that cause dogs to snarl at each other, I'd like to point out that there's random events that cause people to snarl at each other, and that's one of the reasons we're doing this. So maybe we should have a snarling law. There's no law in the U.S. that requires you to carry ID, so you don't have to carry proof of where you live. I would like to see more dogs vaccinated. Maybe we should start a low-cost vaccine clinic downtown. To say that the dining room needs to stay part of the zone is incredibly classist. So you have a dog but no address, you can't eat. There's so many things that we can do. Why aren't we putting more on the table than just this? Because this one's really mean, and I want to see more happening. And as far as the dog being killed, it's a tragedy. Are any other dogs killed by dogs in Eugene?
Claire?
Thank you, Mayor. So one thing I wanted to say, in terms of if we pass this, I will be watching pretty closely to see if there are impacts due to displacement in Whitaker or Jefferson Westside or University District. And I've talked to both the city manager and chief about my concerns on that. But in terms of exempting the dining room, we've heard from some folks that there's concern that we'll be preventing people from accessing social services that are downtown if we implement this dog ban. And right now, I think the only social service that I've identified where folks might bring their dog to while they access the service is the dining room. So I think it's important to exempt that particular social service from the ban so that we aren't impeding anyone's ability to access that service. It is a compromise, absolutely, but we're going to go on to talk about a potential smoking ban, and already we're talking about exemptions for certain businesses if we pass that. So that's part of how we do this process. I also think the foot traffic at 8th and Lincoln, where the dining room is located, is not nearly as intense as the foot traffic at Broadway and Olive, for example. So in terms of those conflicting interactions, I don't think they're as great at that corner as they are in other parts of this map that we're looking at. So I believe it's an acceptable compromise and important if we're going to pass this ordinance to exempt the dining room.
Any other comments from anyone else? Oh, I have Betty again on the queue. There you go.
Yes. First thing I was going to say was about what Claire just said about adjoining neighborhoods. People have to be somewhere. I keep saying that. And if they aren't downtown, they'll be somewhere else with their dogs. About dogs in cars, that's a good point. People, if I wanted to go buy a book at the bookstore downtown and I had my car and it's hot, I can't leave my dog in the car. I could take her into the bookstore, but I'd need to walk a few blocks maybe from where I parked. So I'd be breaking the law. Also, there are places downtown that allow people to eat outside with their dogs. And they don't necessarily, the people who go there don't live downtown. And it's a social thing. As for watching the effects, you can see the effects on adjoining neighborhoods, the bad effects, but watching the effects that are just in people's hearts, people who love their dogs, who can no longer freely walk from where they live through downtown to the river. You won't see that. It'll just be some lonely person who can no longer socialize in this way that he or she is accustomed to. And I think dogs are family. One dog did something really bad. We don't punish them all. We don't do that. I had a little girl once when I had a sore leg come up and hit me on the leg. And it hurt a lot, but I didn't say, let's ban all little girls from downtown. I mean, and there are all kinds of people. There are old people who do bad things. We don't ban a whole class just because something bad happens. And it's terrible that a dog got killed, but we may be killing others by having them hide in their cars, and I know that's illegal too. Thanks, in hot weather. Thank you.
Any other final comments? Greg, anything you want to add?
No, Mayor, not at this time. I'm good.
Okay, so are we then ready to put a motion on the table? So the motion as written, do you want to do that, Alan?
And then we'll amend it.
And then we'll amend it with the...
I move to adopt Council Bill 5170, an ordinance prohibiting dogs in the downtown core as provided in option B.
Second.
All in favor? Sorry. Amendment, sorry.
I offer a friendly amendment. Move to amend proposed EC 4.4273 to exclude food for Lane County's dining room from the dog prohibition so that it states, quote, except as provided in subsection 4 of this section, no dog owner shall permit a dog to be within the downtown core as the area is defined in section 4.871 of this code, except for the publicly owned property and rights of ways abutting the dining room located at 270 West 8th Avenue, end quote.
Okay.
I'll accept that as a friendly.
So will I.
Okay, Alan?
So getting to and from that, is that the part that's about the right of way? So can you come down Charlton?
It's on the edge.
It's on the edge.
I know. So can you walk on the sidewalk that's in the zone? And is it just a notch? Is that what?
It's a notch. That we wrote it to be an address. So it is the way it is.
Get there.
We wrote it, well, because it's on the edge, because that area is located on a corner, you can get at it a number of ways by going maybe a block out. You just can't, the way we currently wrote it, we didn't like carve off an entire chunk of the core, just carved off, like you said, a niche of the core where that's.
Looking at the map, it's basically carving out that corner. The northwest corner.
Right.
So on Lincoln and on 8th.
Correct.
In the parking lot.
Correct. And it's so, and it's just a reminder, this would, so the parking lot, and this is a publicly owned piece of property, but let's say this was a private entity that was running this, the dog ban wouldn't be applying to that parking lot. Someone could pull their car in and get their dog out. This, the way the definition of downtown core is written is it applies to the sidewalks and the public rights of way. So to the extent someone has a private parking lot, they could pull in, get their dog out.
Thank you.
Okay, are we ready to vote? All in favor of this ordinance? 1, 2,
Claire
3,
persuaded
4.
me.
Greg? Claire?
I vote yes.
I vote yes, Mayor.
Was that yes?
Yes, I vote yes.
6 in favor, all opposed? 2. Okay, it passes. Thank you. Thank you. That was right on time. Right on time. So we're on to the next ordinance. City Manager, I guess we don't need to have any more introductory comments on this. So Emily, first in the queue. Mike?
Just waiting on Betty there.
Just waiting on Betty. You want to be in the queue on this one? Okay, there you go. Anybody?
Mayor, could I be in the queue, please?
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, Emily, take it away.
My arguments are pretty much the same for against this. If we don't want people to smoke there, let's give them some other place to smoke. Nobody's using the park blocks for anything. Maybe we should put some amenities there. What about the bars? They'll go out of business. They've been there a long time. If you say people can smoke in the bars, then it's not a health issue anymore, and it becomes classist again. I hate cigarette smoke, but it's outside. It dissipates fairly quickly. I know some people are super, super sensitive. Some people are super, super sensitive to many things. You know, we can't take care of everybody. We're not taking care of the dog owners. I just think this is too extensive. And it does hurt a class of people. It's been studied that homeless people, although it's unhealthy, are more likely to be cigarette smokers. There's camaraderie. It makes you feel better instantly. I hate cigarette smoke, but this is just not fair. Thank you.
Okay. Mike?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm absolutely a no vote on this. When the initial ban on smoking in buildings was done back in, 04, I guess, 03. I was not in favor of that either, for one of several reasons. One was that I mentioned at the time, although not on council, I thought it wasn't a good idea because you'd put a lot of folks out of business. Turned out there were several factors that contributed to other places going out of business, but this was a key factor for Bliss Steakhouse, Doc's Pad on 11th, Wild Duck on 6th, all going out of business after the smoking ban was put in place indoors. I feel that this will have a very detrimental effect on a number of businesses downtown that have invested quite a lot when nobody else would in our downtown, who've done an awful lot of work to try and see downtown get more populated with activity and events. And I don't think it seems an awful lot like this particular law is picking on folks who've been working pretty hard for a long time. And I'm not interested in doing that. It absolutely will harm businesses that are in the downtown core. Even if it's just, they're exempted, but the popular thought process is, hey, you can't smoke downtown, so I'm not going down there to drink or to have a meal or to whatever. I think that's going to be a problem. Number two is that while there absolutely are good scientific studies on the ill effects of secondhand smoke indoors, there are many. I'm not aware, and I would defy anybody to give me a copy of a report for the dangers of secondhand smoke outdoors. I don't believe that exists. And so To say that it is a health-related issue to ban smoking outdoors, I don't believe to be either accurate or truthful, because it simply doesn't have the same ill effects of secondhand smoke indoors. And I'm perfectly happy to be proven wrong on that, but I don't believe I am. It does have the impact of, I think someone mentioned, kids see adults smoking. Okay, I'll grant you that. That's reasonable. But for a number of reasons, I just think this is, in fact, an overreaction that we don't need to be doing for the sake of either health or safety. Thank you.
Thank you. Betty.
Thank you. I forgot to say last time I would support a ban of dogs smoking downtown. As for this one, I think some of the same arguments as against the other one. It will push people to the edges of the district, and it's not people who live nearby will find their yard full of butts if we push them out. I don't think we're going to make people stop smoking by passing this ordinance. I agree it's unsightly, it's unpleasant. I was an enthusiastic supporter of the ban inside buildings when we passed that some years ago. Finally passed 7-1. But that I don't think that put anybody out of business. The old Pat is not out of business, or the wild duck either. But many people were happy that they no longer had the employees, that the customers could stay away, but employees who were subjected to smoke in a confined space were very happy when we passed that. But outdoors, you can cross the street. And I do think that we would be pushing it out to adjoining neighborhoods if we, same thing as with the dog ban. So I originally, some years ago, I thought I would favor this, but I no longer think so. Thank you.
Chris? Oh, I'm sorry. Claire is up.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, since we had this discussion last time at council and chose not to implement anything, I have come to support this much more strongly, and I think we should implement this ban. I would almost prefer it was a wider map. The Community Health Improvement Plan from a couple of years ago identified smoking-related diseases as the leading cause of preventable death in our community, and that's a real public health challenge. I also believe I'm the only city councilor who used to work for a major civil liberties organization and worked to defend the civil rights of individuals. And at this point, there is no constitutionally protected right to smoke in public spaces. So these kinds of bans have proven to help people quit and help people not start smoking, and that is a real public health benefit. Some of the public comment we received on these issues made reference to other public spaces, such as the Santa Monica Promenade in California. So I did a little looking around, and I found that you basically can't smoke anywhere in public in Santa Monica. You can't smoke on the beach, the boardwalk, the promenade, outside buildings. And then I did a search of downtown smoking bans, and a whole list of thriving downtowns came up that have such bans. So we are not treading on new ground with this proposal. And I will point out that the bars raised the alarms when we did the indoor smoking ban and said they would go out of business when we passed that. And I do have to question Councillor Clark's history, because as far as I can see, those same bars that were there are still there. They are doing good business. And I'm not aware of any bars that went out of business due to that initial smoking ban. That said, I would be willing to consider some limited exemptions for those businesses, as long as the exemptions wouldn't completely undermine the public health benefits of this proposal. Thank you.
Chris.
Yeah, this one actually has been very tough for me. And as I said when we brought this up at a previous meeting. I'm always trying to balance community benefit versus individual liberty. And for me, this is exactly what this issue is about. And so that's why I'm very, very torn on it. I was a staunch supporter of the indoor smoking ban because for me, it was not about the smoker. It was about the person around the smoker. It was the public health of the person exposed to secondhand smoke. And in an indoor environment, that's very clearly a problem. Outdoors, I could smell smoke or there could be smoke, but I don't know if I'm exhibiting an actual physical health harm from that secondhand smoke for just the brief period I'm exposed to it. So I'm less inclined to think that there's a secondary smoke harm to other people from outdoor smoking. So you get back to the notion of what is the health issue here, and it's for the smoker. And I can appreciate my desire to help people do the right thing, but at what point does my desire to help people do the right thing impinge on their individual liberty? That's why that keeps becoming a question. Smoking is terrible. I would want everybody to quit smoking. Drinking sugary soft drinks is terrible, and I would want everybody to stop drinking sugary soft drinks. Fast food makes you obese and die early of heart disease. I could tell everybody they could no longer eat fast food. There's many things we do that are not good for us. And I don't think it's the role of government to start going down the road of telling people what they can and cannot do personally. To use the example of swinging a bat, if I'm in my own space and I'm swinging my bat around and I hit myself in the head, that's a stupid thing to do, but you can hit yourself in the head. But don't hit anyone else. And so for me, I think that's where I am on this issue is as a matter of personal health, I don't see this government's role in telling people what they can and cannot do with their personal health. And I understand seatbelt laws, bicycle helmet laws, things like that are in place, and I support them for a good reason, but this is slightly different, at least in my perspective. So I'm inclined to not support this one. But if there should be sufficient votes to pass it, then I would advocate strongly that we provide the opt-out opportunity so it didn't create an undue burden on business.
Alan?
Yeah, I do think this is a public health issue. I hate smoking, and I supported the indoor ban wholeheartedly. I concur with the statement that Claire said that it's no constitutionally protected right to smoke, but I am torn. The same issues that Chris is talking about with treading on people's civil liberties, but we also do that with I don't agree that all the things that we do that protect people that on a health and safety issues are different. I think this is in the same category. So I don't think we would be alone in doing this. It's actually quite common. I am concerned about pushing this out into the surrounding areas and neighborhoods. So I think that we need to think about that more wholeheartedly. And Mr. City Manager, have you guys thought about that and how that rated?
So what the ordinance provides is people outside the zone can choose to opt in if they choose to. And so they would apply to the city through administrative rules to opt into no smoking in front of their particular property as well.
Yeah, one of the places that I hope would do that would be U of O, particularly on Agate where people are smoking on the median, which I think is a terrible traffic safety issue and is just an accident waiting to happen. I'd also like to, if you could address the option B, which modifies and allows people to basically businesses to opt out. Could you explain how that would work? And it leaves it up to the authority and discretion of the city manager to allow that or not, and how you would approach that.
Right. So what we would do is put together administrative rules for the implementation of this ordinance. If you choose that particular option, what that would say is a property could apply to opt out for up to 24 hours per day. So it could be all day, complete opt out or some variation of that. We don't have the specific criteria that would go with that. Our intent, particularly this is, again, just a pilot program. And so we'd be trying to think about how best to implement it in a way that works for folks. And so if a business was particularly concerned that by being a part of this, the intent of this is to have them have the ability to opt out, we can approve that. We can monitor that over the next several months and see how that works, not only for their individual business, but as well as for everybody else that might come in contact with that, and then provide that information back. So we have not put together admin rules and all the criteria for this pending a council decision on the policy.
So for the businesses that are concerned about going out of business because they no longer smoke, people can no longer smoke there or outside on the public right of way, or their employees on breaks, this would allow them to apply for and get an exemption from that. So that means that a business could say, my entire front of my business establishment, I'm opting out, and you can smoke on that sidewalk there.
That's correct.
The ones that don't want to have that would stay in the zone. So it's an opt-out provision. So anybody who's concerned about that. So to the degree that the rest of the places that aren't directly related to that being banned from smoking would impact that businesses, I kind of don't see that connection. So I think the opt-out provision really does handle the business concerns of the folks that came and talked about going out of business because they wouldn't be able to smoke, or their employees would have to walk 5 miles away to go get a cigarette break. So I think this handles that, and I like the opt-out provision, and it also removed the 6 p.m. deadline. So it would exempt them. They would opt out for the entire day.
If they chose to, a business could opt out for any period of time up to complete opt-out.
Yeah. Well, and if they're only open from 5 to 2, then they could say, I only want to opt out while I'm in business.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
George?
Thank you. I wish Betty was still here. The indoor ban that was passed a number of years ago, I think I may have been the only no vote on that. I know when we first had our first discussions that I was opposed to it. I don't have the memory to remember how long, that was a long time ago that I voted on it. As far as I'm concerned, the opt-in or opt-out is really going to be confusing. And because how is somebody walking down the street going to know if business A is opted out or opted in and business B doesn't? And then if you have business owner A saying they can smoke in front of my business and business owner B says not in front of mine, you're going to have conflicts. So I think the options to either opt in or opt out is a very bad idea. I think I'm not going to support this at this time. I know that when this was first brought up, that Councilor Evans, Greg, addressed it as a health issue. I have some concerns, the same as Councilor Clark does, about secondhand smoke in the open area. So no matter how the vote turns out on this, now that we've got the dog issue on a pilot program or whatever the outcome is on this, I hope we as a council and the city manager and the staff now start taking some real aggressive steps forward to address some of the other issues of negative behavior that we're having downtown. Now that these are going to be off our table, let's really look at these seriously and take some real actions to correct what's going on downtown.
Thank you. Before I start the second round, I'm gonna jump in here for a second and say that part of my thinking about responding to your comments, George, about opting in and opting out is that this is a pilot program. So there is the possibility to test it out and see if we end up with just a checkerboard that's unmanageable. Then we know in November that this doesn't actually work, that we can't manage it. If we don't test it, we are not going to know. And so it gives us a chance to kind of learn from experience, which could be valuable. I would also hope, following on your comments about the other things that we do, that we would, at the very least, if it doesn't pass, think about ashtrays and think about the clean up your butts kind of program that we actually need downtown, so that at least we are ameliorating the trash and then that nuisance part of it. So that said, I'm sending it back to you, Mike.
Thank you, Mayor. I understand that and appreciate those comments. It's unfortunate Betty's not with us at the moment at the table, but to her comments and Claire, I listed the three businesses that certainly the smoking ban initially was not the sole cause, but it was of considerable contributing to those places going out of business, and I listed them, and it's not actually questionable. The other piece, though, too, was the degree to which that was an arbitrary thing that interrupted folks who had spent an awful lot of time not to cause and money not to cause problems for other folks, as some of our downtown businesses have. There's Wally, who used to own the what is now Lewis and Clark, but was at the time the waterfront down there, had literally about a month before completed spending $50,000 to put an air filtration system in a side room that was completely sealed and enclosed for people to be able to smoke out on next to the bar. There was a smoking room there when cigars were very popular, and he spent $50,000 to create this, and literally within weeks of having spent all that money, it could no longer be used. And I thought that was really unfortunate that we weren't more understanding of what folks are doing in our community and the money that they're investing to try and make businesses work. I will say, though, that from a community health perspective, another reason why I would vote against this is because we have a number of people, quite a lot of people, who live downtown right now, and obviously those who work downtown. But one of our goals is to try and get more people to live downtown. And as we increase the number of people who do live downtown, who can't or are kind enough to those they live with not to smoke indoors downtown in their homes, we're presenting them with a heck of a position that's really actually a public health problem, that either they have to smoke indoors or they can't live downtown because they can't smoke on the street. I think we'd be driving folks back indoors to smoke, where they actually, from a secondhand smoke perspective, are putting those that they might live with in some danger. So that's just another reason why I'm going to vote against this. And I would say, I guess I apologize, that I hope that for those with the concern on this, if it does fail, that we come back at this at a different time in a different way, because I'm just not sure it's quite ripe yet for us to pass in this form.
Okay, Emily?
Thank you, Mayor. How are we going to measure this? What will the benchmarks be? We'll be looking for a greater percentage of healthier people, less cigarette butts, or better behavior. Smoking does kill, so does drinking, and I would propose that drinking causes even more misery to other people than smoking. Domestic violence, fights, nasty words, very unpleasant behavior. So maybe we should ban drinking downtown, and that would totally take care of our bar business. Cars are much more deadly than cigarette smoke, and we have lots of cars going in this zone, so maybe we should ban those. But we tried that also. And I want the bars to stay open, and I think we should accommodate their clientele. Some of the bars have separate smoking areas. I don't find them very bothersome, but some of them, like sidelines, take up a good half the sidewalk with smoking. So what will happen with them? And if they're smoking on the sidewalk, what's the difference? And another thing is cigarette tax goes to the state, and then the state gives us money. So there'll be less money for us. I really think this is not the right way to improve safety downtown. And I do believe that it's against the people who smoke on those corners. They're not all necessarily snarly. Thank you.
Any other comments, Claire or Greg?
No, thank you, Mayor.
Mayor, if I may, just a couple of brief things. when I first proposed this, I proposed this as a public health issue. I believe it still is a public health issue. I am sensitive to the needs of the bar owners and the restaurant owners who depend on a number of their patrons who do enjoy cigarette smoke and other smoke down there as part of the ambience and the atmosphere that goes along with the dining and drinking experience. Again, this is a short-term pilot project, if you will, in terms of this ordinance. It will sunset the 1st of November. It will give us time to be able to analyze and to look at a number of different aspects if it is effective or it isn't effective. If it's not effective, then it will go away. Or we will look at something else that will be different in terms of being able to address the public health issues that smoking presents. I would also be in favor of, an opt-out provision for restaurants and bars, to this. I think that what we're trying to do is to address smoking in the greater common areas where people walk and cross the street and other things. So, if we can have it, that be part of the ordinance, I think that at the city manager's discretion, that he can allow certain establishments to apply for a provision exempting them from the ordinance. So I would not have a problem with that.
Okay. Manager?
Yeah, I just wanted to offer, if it were important as part of your conversation, we do have people that can talk about, there are some very specific studies that do correlate outdoor smoking with carcinogens, and we can talk about that if that's important for your deliberations today.
That's useful? No? No? I guess we don't have any takers on that.
That's fine.
Okay, we're ready to go with the information we have, I think. So, can we have a motion?
I move to adopt Council Bill 5171, ordinance prohibiting smoking in downtown core as provided in option B.
Second.
All in favor?
Which one?
Wait,
Can you
B.
read?
Oh, sorry, B.
He's
Sorry.
the opt-out.
Opt-out.
Includes the opt-out.
Includes the opt-out.
For 24 hours?
Up to, yeah.
So are we,
That's
it?
That's the motion.
So if,
Let me clarify. Adoption of option B of the ordinance, which modifies option A ordinance, which is the way it was proposed, removes the 6 p.m. time limitation around the grant of authority to the city manager to prohibit smoking in designated areas adjacent to private establishments that request such permission and that comply with the rules adopted by the city manager. So it eliminates the 6 p.m. and allows them to opt out.
Okay. Ready? All in favor? Alan?
Aye.
Greg?
I vote yes, Mayor.
Claire?
Yes.
Yes.
3 in favor? All opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It fails. So we will not have the smoking ban. Okay. I think we are finished. Thank you. Early.